Good evening, everybody, and welcome into another episode of New England Sports Weekly. As always, I am your host, Sean Metcalf, and I am glad that you are deciding to join me this evening. Don't know what happened there, but we are ready to rock and ready to roll here on another episode. And again, it is going to be jam-packed as always, because as you know by now, everything is just colliding at this time of year. We're getting close to the NFL draft. The NBA playoffs are getting ready to start this week, and including the Boston Celtics, who now will be taking on the Nets in the first round of the playoffs. So NBA playoffs are going on. It's getting towards the last handful of regular season games for the Bruins and the NHL. So the NHL playoffs will be kicking off, and MLB has already kicked off their regular season. So everything is starting to collide here. It's one of the better times of the year for a sports fan. It may not be like October or September in the fall when you have football in full swing at MLB playoffs. That's going to be one of my favorite times of year, MLB playoffs and football going on at the same time. That's happening right there. So that's one of my favorite. But nonetheless, it is still a great time of year with NHL and NBA playoffs right around the corner, and the draft and baseball. It's great. It's good time to be a sports fan, and great time to be a Boston sports fan, as always. So without further ado, we'll jump right into the out of the box segment here. As we mentioned, the Boston Celtics decided to play their starters versus the Milwaukee Bucks. No, I'm sorry, excuse me, the Memphis Grizzlies in their last regular season game. So there were a couple of scenarios that were up in the air. What could happen? They could, the quote unquote, the worst they could finish would be the fourth seed, and that's which mean they would have had to face the Toronto Raptors. And obviously there was all the speculation with Jaylen Brown and Al Horford and who has the vaccine, who doesn't. So that was the big speculation there. Would they do that? And Milwaukee took a little bit of the suspense out of it when they clinched the third seed. So obviously Boston could not get the third seed at least in the last game, because that was decided before they played to face the Bulls. So Boston played their starters. They decided to play the starters, not fall to the 4 seed. So they won that game against the Grizzlies. And their prize is to play the number 8 seed Brooklyn Nets, who won their play-in game, is the way that the NBA does it now, which is so stupid. They should have just stayed with 8 playoff teams. There's already enough playoff teams. Now there's 10, technically 10, because now you have 2 play-in games. One decides a play-in game to play in the play-in game, and then the winner of that game, the winner of the first play-in game gets to go play the second seed, and then the loser of the play-in game has to go play another play-in game to go to the playoffs. So thank you, NBA, for adding another level of crap there. The 9th and 10th teams are just awful. Just awful. Not even worth it. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say the Cavs are awful, but they're not a true playoff contender, even though at one point in this year they were in the 4th seed. And I think at one point they might have even been briefly in the 1 seed, but nonetheless, nobody wants to see the 9th and 10th playoff teams. That's just ridiculous. But nonetheless, the Celtics do get the Brooklyn Nets. And yes, the Nets are an 8 seed, but of course, if you follow basketball at all, you know they're not a classic 8 seed where, you're the number 2, you just roll over an 8 seed. No, this is the Brooklyn Nets, who have arguably the best player in the NBA in Kevin Durant. And then you have the human enigma, but still very talented Kyrie Irving. So you have 2 superstars that the Celtics have to worry about. So again, this is a team that to start the year was, I believe, the favorite in the East, or at least co-favorites in the East, along with the defending champion Milwaukee Bucks, to get to win the NBA title, or at least represent the East. But with the James Harden situation where he wanted out. He wasn't happy with what was going on down there. He got out. Now he's in Philadelphia. And the Nets ended up getting Ben Simmons. Kyrie dealt with the whole vax mandate in New York, which finally got lifted as far as not the actual mask mandate with civilians, but, or I should say the general public, but it was more it was a ban on, I believe it was athletes and performers that were coming in. If you weren't vaccinated, then you couldn't play if you were an athlete in the city of New York. And it was a bunch of ridiculousness. And I don't know. It was just a circus watching that. So I believe it was 3 weeks ago before the regular season ended that whole thing got resolved and the mayor of New York lifted that ban. So nonetheless, Kyrie Irving will be playing in this series, full time in the series. He'll be playing at home and in Boston. So the Celtics have their hands full moving forward. We will definitely get into that here shortly and break down the Celtics' chances and a little bit of other Celtics news that we will definitely talk more about here as well. Is Adrian Wojnarowski, otherwise we better know him for dropping Woj bombs. He dropped one here this afternoon that said it is very likely that Robert Williams III will be ready for the first round. Now, remember, it's roughly about a 4 week to 6 week original time period that they said that it would take for this injury to heal after having the surgery. But what we found out here later on is that Robert Williams is on that short side of things here, and their quote was very real for Williams' return from Wojnarowski. So again, Wojnarowski reporting that he's going to be on the shorter. Obviously, he reported earlier they're going to be on the shorter end of this, and because the NBA playoffs drag out for 5 years, it's ridiculous. It'll be 4th of July before the NBA finals are over. But in all sincerity, though, it is going to last a little bit longer. So Robert Williams actually might be ready. The talk is maybe game 4, 5, or 6. So towards the middle to the end of this series, I would say if he comes back, it's probably going to be at the end of this series, maybe game 6. So that would be a welcome sight to have Robert Williams back. Now, of course, if the Celtics do take down the Nets, that's where I would want Robert Williams back for the second series, which are most likely going to have to face the Milwaukee Bucks. Because remember, the Celtics would get the next highest seed in this matchup, assuming that the Miami Heat win their series in that case. So the Celtics definitely have a hard road to hoe here in this series after they chose their fate in this series. And then looking over at their counterparts in the Garden, the Boston Bruins are dealing with another rash of injuries to their defensive core. As in Sunday's game against the Blues, they lost Matt Grzelcyk in the second period. So he's out. And there was some hopes that he'd be ready for tomorrow's game as we get closer to the end of the season. But he looks as though he might miss tomorrow's game. At least that's what the word from Bruce Cassidy seems to be for Matt Grzelcyk. And then Brandon Carlo, who had been starting to play very well, and of course is one of the top 4 defensemen for the Boston Bruins. And of course, after the addition of Hampus Lindholm, who himself is trying to come back from a lower body injury, it was the top defenseman there with McAvoy until Lindholm came in. So again, things aren't as hopeful. Well, I shouldn't say hopeful, but as far as in the short term, within the immediate week or so aren't looking as good for Carlo. So we'll see, because he's had some injury history when it comes to dealing with concussions and head injuries. So we'll see how things go for Brandon Carlo. Hopefully he's back before we get to the playoffs, because the Bruins are going to need every man on deck for this one, especially on the defensive end here for the Boston Bruins, because trust me, in the playoffs, you go through defensemen like in nothing else. It is ridiculous. You go through defensemen like ice on a hot day, on a 95-degree day. It's just ridiculous, the amount of defensemen that just you have to go through in the playoffs. I believe it was it last year or the year before, the Bruins went through 9 defensemen. So again, you're going to need everybody that you can. Not just the McAvoys and Lindholms and Carlos. You're going to need everybody. So again, it's going to be imperative that you get your basically 75% of your top core back, because obviously McAvoy is out there, but the rest of the rest of his partners are trying to get back. And of course, let's not forget David Pastrnak is still out as well. But the encouraging news, if we want to look at a positive note here, is that David Pastrnak and Hampus Lindholm were at morning skate today. So we'll see if maybe they get in tomorrow night's game. We'll see, maybe before we get to the end of the regular season. And at least maybe they get their feet back underneath them before we get to the playoffs. We shall see how things go, but at least there's some positive news moving forward here from the Boston Bruins. Now, the Boston Red Sox got their season underway as they ended up drafting. Think about the Patriots draft, as they ended up opening the season on the road in New York against the Yankees. They dropped 3 games. They salvaged the series on Sunday Night Baseball, as they got probably the worst start that they've had this season from Tanner Houck. And I mean, Tanner Houck wasn't bad. I mean, Tanner Houck only gave up the 3 runs in that game, so he was pretty good. It just as far as statistically, like his stat line, I mean, it was decent. It was good. But what was a little bit troubling was the velocity was there, but the control was off. So he gave up probably the worst start over this 6 games that the Red Sox have had so far. But they were able to salvage 1 game. They did take the series today in Detroit, although they got a little bit of a scare after they were up 9-2. They won 9-7 as Detroit looked like they were going to spoil this one here and send Boston back home 2-4 before they start their home schedule here in April. But nonetheless, they were able to take 2 or 3 from Detroit, and now they are sitting at 500. So yeah, was it a super successful trip? No, but you ended 500. You're back level basically, and now you're going to be home to face the Minnesota Twins for the home opener on Friday night, as they have tomorrow off. But the Red Sox have started their season, and their one big issue that we thought was going to be a problem was going to be the back end of that rotation and the bullpen. And for the most part, except for today with the bullpen, everything actually worked out pretty well. Is that bullpen had a really low ERA. I believe it was like 0.69 up until the Brian Brazier gave up that 2-run home run to Javier Baez on Monday. And then today is obviously not going to do any favors. But again, Ben, more than you could ask for, more than you thought was going to happen out of the back of that rotation with Rich Hill and Michael Wacha. I know it's only 1 start for each, but they look okay. They look better than I thought they were going to be for a 42-year-old and a former first-round pick that looks like he's lost something there, but maybe they can find something out of it, and we'll see. But good news there for the Red Sox as they return home and get ready to take on the Twins. Now, as we mentioned off the top of the Out of the Box segment, as we close this out and move into the meat of the show here, it is the Boston Celtics who will be preparing to take on the Brooklyn Nets for the first round of the playoffs. Now, as we mentioned, they had an opportunity to take the easy way out, or it depends on how you want to see it, and face Toronto. It'd be the 4 seed. And when I say the easy way out, you're facing Toronto, who we know obviously they're basically their stars have pretty much all left over the last 4 years or so. Kawhi Leonard obviously is out in Los Angeles, and Kyle Lowry is down in Miami. So it's just DeMar DeRozan still left in Toronto and Pascal Siakam. So, I mean, they have solid players. It's just nobody that you would go home and write about, basically, for that Toronto team. But the concern that was on people's minds, maybe not everybody's, but some people, were if Jaylen Brown was vaccinated, because we had the whole comments from Ime Udoka and the front office where it was kind of vague and open ended, really didn't mention anything about if they were vaccinated, just, oh, yeah, they'll be ready to go. And of course, Al Horford did come out here in the last couple of days and did say that he is vaccinated, so he'd be ready. So it was just going to be a mess from that standpoint. Obviously, you would still have Jaylen Brown, and if there were anybody else that wasn't vaccinated, you would still have them for the 4 home games. If you went 7 games, you would have them for all your home games in Boston. So that wouldn't be an issue. It's just going to Toronto. Could you take 1 game on the road, maybe 2 games, shorten this series for the Celtics? But that is, at least in the first round, depending on how things kind of shake out here later in the playoffs, at least first round wise, it's not going to be an issue for the Celtics, as they will take on the like you said, take on the Nets. But honestly, I would have rather them. I know you're going to have to play tough teams in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying run away from the tough teams all the time, but when you potentially, if they win this series, which I think the Celtics will take this in 6 from the Nets. I think that I know I just gave the prediction, and I'll officially give it, but I think Celtics in 6. And as far as, if you win this series, then you have to move on. And most likely, you're going to get the Milwaukee Bucks here in the second round. And then, depending on if the Miami Heat win out in their series, which I think, because usually the NBA mostly goes chalk for the most part. There really haven't been huge upsets in a long time in the NBA. But if things go chalk, because you're the higher seed, you would get the 3rd seeded Milwaukee Bucks after they take out the Bulls. And then again, if you are able to take out the Bucks, then you have to go through Miami, which Miami always plays you tough. But of course, that second round against the defending NBA champion and 2-time MVP in Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks would be really tough. Now, obviously, if you get Robert Williams back, that's gonna make things life a lot easier. Now, obviously, you have to have confidence with how well the Celtics have played since January, since the new year has started. They have been an absolutely different team, because the Celtics honestly were heading into that 7 through 10 seed territory of how things were honestly shaking out for Boston early in the season. It just did not look good at all. But now it's a totally different story. But again, the one dent in the armor there is not having Robert Williams, at least to start this series against Brooklyn. If he was totally healthy 100%, I would definitely have no hesitation with taking Boston over Brooklyn. But again, really, do I think, and am I totally upset that they did this route? No, because I mean, you have to have confidence that you're going to beat the good teams, and of course, you know that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum going to have a chip on their shoulder facing Kyrie. They were going to want to beat him, and obviously, with the respect that Tatum has for Durant. He has that admiration, but also that competitive spirit where he wants to beat him. Of course that exists, but just honestly, though, I would have liked to maybe at least give him a better shot in the first round, at least maybe an easier shot there in the first round, and play Toronto so that once you do have to finally face like a Milwaukee, or if you had to face a Brooklyn or something along those lines. But so basically the point there being is if Milwaukee had gotten the second seed, they would have had to have played Brooklyn. So you would have had to, one of those teams would have had to knock each other out. So then you're only left with either Brooklyn or left with Milwaukee in the second round. So you only have to go through one superstar laden team pretty much at that point, because and then probably end up, and if you can make it through that second round, and if you make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, then you make it to the Eastern Conference Finals against Miami. So I mean, yes. So I was in favor of more of going the little bit of the easier route and have Brooklyn and have Milwaukee duke it out and at least help you out in that manner. And before you give me any kind of crap, remember Belichick does this all the time. Remember famously in 05, he had Matt Castle throw the ball into about like the third row, fifth row of the stands in the end zone on a 2-point conversion, so that they would avoid playing what was it, Pittsburgh at the time, I believe, so that they could get Jacksonville. Belichick's done it, and he's done it other times as well. So don't give me other examples. Don't say me that guys like Belichick would never do that. He's done it. So you have to play the numbers at sometimes. You have to at least give yourself maybe a little bit of a breather before you dive headfirst into some of this big time competition here for the Celtics. So again, I was more in favor of Boston going the route of playing Toronto. And yes, if Miami loses, now that you're the 2 seed, you'll have home court throughout. Yes, would that be nice? But again, it's basketball. It's not like baseball where it's Fenway Park, the dimensions, it's a true home field for you, obviously the fans, or even in football, obviously, like if you play for the Seattle Seahawks or you play for the Kansas City Chiefs, you play in one of these stadiums that absolutely is rocking, then you're going to have true home field advantage. And don't get me wrong, obviously I'm a Celtics fan and I watch plenty of Celtics games, and you hear the Garden the Garden is probably the loudest home court in the NBA. And I know that sounds like a homer take, but I mean, honestly, it's probably the most diehard fan base in basketball, them and Lakers fans. And I'm talking the everyday Lakers fans. I'm not talking about the Jack Nicholson, excuse me, and all the rest of those fans that are the Hollywood fans. I'm talking about the everyday ones. But again, I'm not saying that there aren't other diehard fan bases out there, but the Garden gets rocking. It's been rocking probably like last 5 years or so since the Celtics have actually been on, since probably they've had Jason Tatum and they had Isaiah Thomas, little IT. So yes, like I said, I know I'm a homer on this one, but trust me, the Garden does get rocking. But again, it's basketball. So on the scale of home court advantages, I'd probably put it in basketball. I'd probably put that fourth out of the major sports in this case. But again, I still think the Celtics have a good chance. It just makes the road tougher for them to go down. It really does, because now you're going to have to go through Brooklyn, and if you win, you're going to have to go through Milwaukee and then go through the Miami Heat. So this is going to be really tough if you're the Celtics. But again, if you get Robert Williams back, like Woj says, that there's a very real possibility that this could happen, then I would feel better. Obviously you're going to have to see how Robert Williams plays, because is he going to be 100% after only being out 3 to 4 weeks with having that meniscus surgery on his knee. So it will be interesting. But if he comes back, even if it's more for the defensive side. And then obviously he is that bigger guy that you can alley-oop it to, and he can create some offense on the inside in the paint. but obviously it's more for that defense and his blocking ability. He averages over 2.5 blocks a game, so he's a stud defensively for you. So it's obviously, especially if you get out of the first round, and maybe he only plays the 3 games in the series, 2 games in the series. But if you have him ready to go for that Milwaukee series, and obviously not trying to put the cart before the horse here, but just thinking at least a little bit of ahead as a fan, then you have him against Giannis Antetokounmpo, and that I would love if you have him against Giannis. That would just be a godsend to have him against Giannis, because it's so tough to sit there and play Giannis as far as without having a guy like Robert Williams. Because I like Tice, but Tice is a good role player. He's a good guy to have off the bench, but he's not a guy that I want to have out there in your starting 5 this whole time, obviously, unless you're forced into that situation, which you are right now. But as far as the Celtics' chances, though, what I think everybody kind of underestimates or doesn't look at enough here, at least in my opinion, is don't get me wrong, the Robert Williams defensively, along with Marcus Smart, are the heart are what have really along. Obviously, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are at the top, anyways. I'm just saying after Tatum, the defense of Robert Williams has been the biggest revelation outside of Jason Tatum taking his ascendancy into that top 10, top 5 players in the NBA. So Robert Williams is, without Robert Williams, yes, it's gonna be harder. But what I think people just are underestimating, or when they look at playing a team like the Nets, is yes, they have Kevin Durant, who I am scared. No, but I respectfully, there's a lot of respect there. To say whatever you want about him personally, but just as a basketball player, he is such a good he's such a good basketball player. He's arguably the best player in the league right now. And yes, as much as my blood boils for Kyrie, as much as I hate him, I want him to lose. He is a great basketball player when he actually wants to compete, and when he's not out there doing whatever and whenever he's in his own mind. But when he wants to turn it on, he's dangerous. But after Kyrie, yes, you have Seth Curry, but he's just a one-way player. He's just going to shoot his 3. Seth Curry is he's a pretty good offensive player. Obviously, he's nowhere near his brother's level, but he's a good player. And of course, the X factor in this is going to be what happens with Ben Simmons. I still don't think he's going to be ready for this series, even though there are kind of some halfway reports, maybe not. We'll see. I still don't think he's going to play in this series. So really, there's, outside of Durant and Kyrie, now that James Harden's gone, there really is no other threat, because even if Ben Simmons comes back, offensively, I'm not scared of him. Yes, I should say from the shooting standpoint, I'm not scared of him. Yeah, he can distribute the ball, and that will definitely help them a lot. But when it comes to actually shooting and scoring, it's going to be in the hands of Kevin Durant and Kyrie. And yes, they could probably take over one game, but it's going to be tough facing this Boston Celtics team, which, especially later in the series, if you get Robert Williams back, and even without him, they're still a good defensive team. Now with Robert Williams, they're a great defensive team. I think they were second in net rating as far as defensively for the year. So it's definitely going to be obviously a tough series. That's why I picked the Celtics in 6. But again, I just think that people are forgetting that you have Jason Tatum and not that you have him, but they're just forgetting how great Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been this year, especially Tatum, where he's taken that ascendancy forward, where I think this is where we're going to see Jason Tatum shine and finally put this team on his back for a full postseason, where this is going to be this postseason of Jason Tatum. I think they're going to be able to carry this momentum that they've had for 3 months now, for almost 4 months now, into the playoffs. So, especially against this Nets team where, yes, you have KD, yes, you have Kyrie, you have two great players, but after that, there's it drastically drops off as far as what this Nets team can do. So, especially if you only have one of them on the court, and then if you have this pretty good Celtics team that, even if you don't have Tatum or Brown, vice versa, whichever one's off the floor, you still have pretty decent shooting in Grant Williams, who just coming into the year, I thought was I thought Celtics fans overrated him, but he's turned out to be a pretty, I think he's 42, 43%, your best 3-point shooter. And then you have Pritchard, who is been actually better than I thought, because I thought last year he kind of faded down the stretch, but Pritchard has really turned himself into a pretty decent player, so he can shoot for you. And then obviously you have Marcus Smart, who defensively is very stifling, and then when he can turn on his game offensively, he's obviously this. I don't want to see him take a million shots. He's better off since this year, since he's become a true point guard and distributed, and then he takes his shots when he can. He's been a 10 times better player, so he's obviously going to be more important. I just like the overall makeup of the Celtics roster. Is it perfect? No, they still could use another shooter along with Brown and Tatum, but again, I think they're more complete when it comes to versus the Nets, where yes, the Nets are very, very top heavy. And yes, I know they have Seth Curry, but other than that, it's just really kind of really drastically drops off after Seth Curry. Whereas the Celtics, it's not as a dramatic a drop off for them, at least in my opinion. So again, this is where I'm going to take them in 6. The first game is going to be Sunday night. And then again, I think it's like maybe 2 or 3 days in between. It's just I think it's Wednesday night that they play. It's the NBA playoffs. Just, man, I don't know. It's ridiculous. But we'll see how this all rolls out here for the Boston Celtics. As I'm looking at the schedule here. Yeah, it's Sunday, Wednesday, then next Saturday. Man, it's wow. And then they go to Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So after next Saturday, it's every other day if needed. So, man, this is wow. I don't know. Man, I don't know. That must be a nice cushy gig, having 3 days off. Wow. So probably next week we're going to probably have to move the show to a different day. We'll talk about that later on, but so we can watch that. Everybody can watch that playoff game. But again, it'll be interesting to see how things shake out. But like I said, I'm going to take the Celtics here in 6. Now, as we mentioned, the Boston Bruins are kind of hitting a little bit of the skids here now, and partly due to having a lot of injuries, because obviously now you're dealing with Pasternak, your best goal scorer, is out. You're dealing with injuries to your defensive core big time, because now you have to deal with Hampus Lindholm out. You have to deal with Matt Grzelcyk out. You're dealing with now Brandon Carlo, who are out. So, of course, things are going to look worse for you now. And now you're just trying to tread water. And, of course, they're going to make the playoffs. There's no worry of them missing. Now it's just a matter of you had some momentum that you were building, that you were getting towards maybe being that second or third seed in your division. But that really, I can't say it's gone out the window, but the momentum that you had when you beat the Lightning, when you made some moves up, it's just now that with these injuries, it's going to cause you to slip back. And obviously, health is going to be the most important thing in this whole situation, but they've lost a little momentum here. And that it's going to be interesting to see how things kind of shake out here as we get towards the end of the regular season, to see if maybe we can, like I mentioned off the top of the show, Hampus Lindholm and Pasternak were skating again. So if you get those guys back, you can slide Hampus Lindholm back into the top pairing there with Charlie McAvoy. So that gives your top defensive pairing back. And then you can mix and match with the rest now that you're dealing with injuries to Carlo and Grizzlick. So hopefully, and it sounds like maybe Grizzlick might have played tomorrow, but they might give him another extra day or two until and see how he reacts. So if you get Grizzlick back, then things will start looking a little bit better. And if Pasternak again, who skated, if he comes back, that'll look even better. But the more concerning thing here for me, I'm not slamming on the panic button here. But when it comes to goaltending, obviously Linus Ullmark has played very well. He's really good, minus that Blues game. But when it comes to Jeremy Swayman, who I was very high on coming into the season, I thought it was so weird that they brought in Tuukka Rask. Even though I love Tuukka, I just thought the way that they have these three goaltenders all jumbled up, what are we doing here? But Swayman prevailed. Then he came out really great after all the Tuukka things have subsided. He played really well, but over his last 3 games or so, he's hit that, I guess if you want to call it rookie wall, if you want to put it that way, because obviously this is going to be the most he's ever played into his career. Because remember, last year was his first year in pro hockey, because after he was done at the University of Maine, he came and played, what was it, in somewhere in like the end of March or so and into April. So he didn't have a lot of time. And obviously with the injuries to Tuukka, he came up and played. And then obviously this year, this is his first full year. So he really has, I think it was like 19 games down in Providence, I think. But basically, his time in pro hockey has been short. But obviously, you play all those years and you play your 3 or 4 years in Maine. It's not like you're playing against good competition. But again, so it looks as though Swayman is hitting maybe a little bit of a rookie wall, but it is a little bit concerning there because this is a guy that I thought was going to take over as the number one goaltender. And I know the days of having a guy play 55, 60 games in net are long gone. You're more looking at a 45, like a 45 game split as your top tier goaltender. And then your second tier goaltender plays 36, 30 some odd games for you. But anyways, I mean, it has been a nice combo, but now with that little lull that you have with Swayman, it's a little concerning here for me because he was the guy that I was hoping was going to take off. Now, it doesn't mean that he can't find it again here before the postseason starts, but we're kind of losing a little bit of time. And it looks as though Ullmark might have stolen that job back as far as being the number one, at least the 1A in this situation. But again, there have been those times. Remember going back to the 06 playoffs, Cam Ward stole that job away because he was in that net battle as well. I'm the veteran that he was with. It's escaping me at the moment, but Cam Ward was the one that ended up playing really well, took that team to the Stanley Cup Finals in 06, and they ended up winning. So obviously we've seen those situations, and even look at Jordan Binnington, the St. Louis Blues goaltender back in 2019. I know it hurts Bruins fans to think about it, but he went on that unbelievable run. And after that, he hasn't been great. And I'm not saying, obviously, I'm thinking I think way more highly of Swayman than I do those of Binnington. But again, maybe this is a situation where if you have a so-so game here from Ullmark in the postseason, maybe you get Swayman to come in and he rectifies things here and he turns things around for you and he steals the show. But again, it's just more on my end. It's just disappointing just because I was looking forward to seeing what he would do in the playoffs. I'm not saying he's not going to play, but it's just he just hasn't lived up to the standard that he set earlier on during this stretch since February through March, where he looked like he was going to take the reins here. And where Ullmark, it was kind of flipped. It looked like Ullmark had a few bad games there, and then Ullmark's flipping it around. So again, this isn't like with football where, oh, you have two quarterbacks, you have none. If you have two goaltenders, it's not apples to apples in that situation. Yes, you would love to have a Tuukka Rask in his prime, a Martin Brodeur, a Lafleur, not a Lafleur, like I said, Martin Brodeur, or you name it, in goal um, for you in going into the playoffs. Why am I skipping on one of these? This is going to drive me nuts. The Montreal goaltender for them from the 80s to the 90s. Oh my goodness. I'll probably end up thinking about it here later on in the show. Oh man, I'm embarrassed on that one. So, anyways, we'll skip that one here. But you catch the drift here. I don't think, obviously it would be nice to have one of those, but at least if you have one guy catch fire, then that would be nice. But as far as my concern with this team, it's honestly, it's just get healthy at this point, because you have some talent that's there. You have talent that's there. I like that first line, but obviously you're going to need that second line with Pasta and Hall, and depending on how they want, and now with Eric Holla, who has really been great for this Bruins team as that second line center. I just got to give credit to Don Sweeney on that one. Is he perfect? No, but he's been pretty good GM, at least in my opinion. You went and got Eric Holla, who had a career year. I think it was 17, the year that the Golden Knights, their first year in existence, went to the Stanley Cup. It was either 17 or 18 that he had a career year there, but he's having another great year here for Boston, as lately he's just been able to really anchor that line. He's been that guy that can set plays up in the middle for guys like Pasta, and for Hall, especially when Pasta's healthy, to snipe from the from the dot, and then obviously let Hall make plays around the net and use his athleticism there. So he's been a perfect second line center, at least over these last 2 months here for Boston. It just seems like everything started to click at least before these injuries really started to mount up. Things started to click. So I was really excited for what these Bruins could do, and I thought the Bruins could make some noise in the playoffs. But obviously now you have to kind of slam on the brakes here, looking at these the Bruins and what could be going forward. But we'll keep an eye on that, see who's going to be ready and who maybe miss more time than we thought as we move closer to the playoffs here, as the regular season winds down for your Bruins. Now, the Boston Red Sox, who we talked about off the top of the show, opened up the season, like we mentioned, in New York against the Yankees, dropped 2, won the Sunday Night Baseball game. But the concern over that series and in the first game against Detroit, and even last night, or in the afternoon the other day, was more the offense. That was the concern in this case, because we knew after they signed Trevor Story that lengthened their lineup, because you have Kiki Hernandez, Rafael Devers, JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, Trevor Story, Alex Verdugo, and if Bobby Dahlbeck can turn things around, that's a hell of a first seven in your lineup to go for the Red Sox. And obviously that allows you to hide a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr., although he had a couple big hits today that were smacked into left field for him. So he had himself a pretty decent day, got off the schneid, was 0 for to start the season. And of course, Christian Vasquez, who is a decent offensive catcher. He had that one great year in 2019 where he had the 23 home runs and hit over 270 in that season. So he had that good year. But honestly, though, I mean, when you have at least those 6 players that you can really count on, and if Bobby Dahlbeck can tap into that power more and tap into more consistency, then that's going to be really deep 7 that you have there, and a really good lineup overall. But that New York series, it looked as though in that first game where Rafael Devers hit that absolute missile into the upper deck in New York, they went up 2-0. JD Martinez doubles and gets in Xander Bogaerts. You're up 3-0. So you're like, oh, and that was in the first inning. So you're like, oh, this offense is already clicking. They already came to play. And then, of course, really didn't do much after that. They ended up losing that game 4-3. It just was not what you expected after they started off in that first inning. And of course, the bats got absolutely shut down again in game 2. Luckily, they won 4-3 on the Sunday night baseball game, thanks to Bobby Bombs' first opposite field shot of the year with Dahlback hit that solo shot. So they were able to salvage the series, but in the first game against the Detroit Tigers, they lost. Their bats just were MIA. They lost to Daniel Manning. It was not good. It wasn't good. They just were 0 for the century with runners in scoring position. It was abysmal. Every time over the first 4 games and even 4.5 games with guys in scoring position, you'd have even their top tier bats, even the Bogarts, the Betts, the Devers, really weren't producing. I mean, Rafi was the closest to producing because right now he's hitting 341, obviously after a couple really good days now. But like I said, over the first 4 days, it was just really concerning to not have the bats show up when this is where you paid all that money to Trevor Story. And then obviously all the reports about what you're going to pay for Rafael Devers and where it would be. And all of this, it was just concerning, not majorly concerning, because obviously, the old cliche, they're at the end of the season, you flip them over and what's going to be on the back of their bubblegum card, that whole thing, of course, obviously it's going to turn around, but it still was to the point where that's the strength of your team and you weren't able to score runs. And the New York series wasn't obviously it was frustrating because it's the Yankees and you want to beat the Yankees every time. Obviously, I know you're not going to beat them 19 times in a season, but you want to take as many as you can from them. And this year, with as important as though, obviously every year the division games are important, but this year especially with 4 teams that are vying for a playoff spot in Toronto, Boston, New York, and Tampa, obviously obviously Baltimore is going to be they're already done for the year. They were done before they started, but anyways, you got 4 teams that are vying for a playoff spot, and there's not going to be a game 163 this year. You're going to have the 3 wild card teams, and basically it's going to come down to tiebreakers. So if you don't do well in this division and it comes down to a tiebreaker and you lose out on a tiebreaker, you either get a lower seed or you lose out on a playoff spot to somebody else because of tiebreakers, then you're screwed. So that's where it's just frustrating that they weren't able to pull off something against New York in that case. But then even more frustrating was the first game against Detroit against Manning, where to me, Manning was finding his locations, dotting the corners, but at times, but then there would be some pitches that he would kind of leave out. They just didn't take advantage. But I mean, he pitched pretty decent. But it was just frustrating that you made Manning look like a number 1 or a number 2 starter at this point, where Detroit has some interesting pieces there. I mean, they ended up signing Erod, who they absolutely slapped around today. So, I mean, hey, as a Red Sox fan, I've seen that one before. But like I said, though, the concerning thing there was for what, 13 innings in this series against Detroit. Their bats were absolutely quiet because even in game 2, they really didn't do too much against the Tigers. So that was just that to me, that was just the really upsetting thing. It's just like you weren't able to in this series against the Tigers up until you faced Erod today. Everything was just silent. And going into this year, the concern was the back end of the rotation and the bullpen, which obviously it's very, very early. There's 156, 155 games to go in the season. So it's very young. So obviously I know things can turn around and flip, but you got good starts out of Waka. You got a good start out of Hill. And up until today's game, the bullpen really has pitched well. I mean, Diekman came in that New York series and had balls of steel there and got the first save of the season after he struck out Judge. Now today was a whole different story. So I think this is more or less what we're going to see is probably a good performance followed up by a rocky performance here from guys like Diekman, who I like his stuff. It's just like we saw today, when his command goes, it goes. So that's going to be the problem is you have guys that have decent stuff out there, but it's going to be a matter of them actually being able to find consistency out of the pen. Because obviously, Garrett Whitlock, yes, and we forgot to mention this off in the out of the box segment, but the Boston Red Sox ended up signing Garrett Whitlock to an extension. So that is great news. And it was an absolute steal. And I am not kidding, folks. It was a absolute steal. So we'll pull up this We'll pull this up here for you. But anyways, Garrett Whitlock, I believe it's a 4-year extension on top of what he already has. So they basically bought out some of his free agency years here for Garrett Whitlock. Now is let's see. Yeah, so he'll be a free agent after the 2026 season. So his first year of the new contract, it's going to be $1 million. Then in 2024, it's 3.25. 25, it's 5.2. And then it is 7.2. And then I believe there are some. I'm sorry. He's a free agent after 2028. So a 6-year deal. He signed a 6-year deal excuse me, it's 4 years because they bought out some of the arbitration, but it's a 4-year deal for 18. Excuse me, for about, what are we looking at here, for 40 something million? A steal, an absolute steal. My math is probably going to be off on this, but you understand what I'm talking about. Somewhere in that $30 to $40 million range. And this is a guy that has been an absolute weapon out of the bullpen. Probably going to end up being a pretty good starter for them because he came up as a starter, but they put in the bullpen after Tommy John, and he's just been a weapon. But his stuff plays as a starter or a reliever, so he's going to be locked up for long term for a chump change. Absolute steal, man. His the Players Association must be calling his agent 24/7 being like, what the hell did you do? you just signed your client for absolute pennies on the dollar as far as when it comes to major league pitchers are concerned, especially a weapon like him. So that was a great surprise there for the Boston Red Sox to get Garrett Whitlock for absolutely nothing. So that was the big news for Boston as they signed him. But again, getting back to the game action, with Garrett Whitlock, Garrett Whitlock is obviously your best weapon there in the bullpen. And after that, it's kind of you mix and match. You do have Cutter Crawford, who pitched pretty well in New York today. Not good as he walked the bases loaded. He ended up, I believe, he got tagged for 3 runs in that 8th inning. That wasn't good. So it was just Some people want to put him in already into the Whitlock category of, oh, he's a starter turn reliever. Could he do the Whitlock role? And obviously, that first game against New York came out and was nails, but this one against Detroit was just blah. Maybe you can, I don't know, maybe you want to chalk it up to that crowd just being a absolute bore fest, snore fest out there. They would just did not show up. Supposedly they had a 10,000 attendance, but maybe maybe 200 people, at least when I was looking on camera. It was ridiculous. So it'll be interesting to see how things shake out though in that bullpen now that Matt Barnes did make his official debut, as he was a little late into the season because things were a little up in the air because he had a sore back. But he made his second appearance today. He looked pretty decent. So if you can get Matt Barnes back on track, if he can find a little bit of his velocity and the little movement there, then he'll be, then you'll have another reliable guy. And then Hansel Robles, who last year would always scare the you know what out of me just because you didn't know if he was going to pump a 99-mile fastball and strike somebody out, use that slider, strike him out, or if he was going to walk the bases loaded in a key situation and walk in a run or serve up a tater. But I mean, so far he's actually turned out over probably the stretch run last year and in the early goings this year, he's been pretty reliable. But still, I mean, obviously, still, I wouldn't call him an elite reliever, but it's for what you have, he's one of your better options. Now, hopefully, this is where Boston kind of looks in the free agency market or see what's left out there. Because I know Trevor Rosenthal, the former closer for the Cardinals and Athletics, is 31. He's out there. I know he's been dealing with injuries, but maybe you put a flyer out on him, give him a minor league deal if he can't find anything in the majors, and you let him kind of rehab there and see what he's got left. And if he's doing pretty well down there, bring him up to Boston. Or I would still be in favor if you give him a major league deal and you kind of throw him in to some low leverage situations and see what he's got left and see if he can maybe recapture that and then have a late inning guy. At least that's one of the cheaper options. And then obviously you look into the trade market and see what you can find. I know it's early, so not a lot of trades are going to happen unless you're the Oakland A's or you're the Athletics, or sorry, you're the A's or you're the Cincinnati Reds. But nonetheless, the back end of the rotation and the bullpen minus today were pretty good in the early goings. So the very, very early returns, the probably 2% of the season, which we've seen, has been pretty decent out of them. So hopefully that trend can continue, and hopefully what we saw today out of the bats when they scored 9 runs in this game, where Rafael Devers, who is one of the bats early on in the season, has consistently been pretty good as he's hitting 341 and has 1 home run and I believe he's at 3 or 4 RBIs now. So he looks like his old self already. So it's just kind of waiting for everybody else to catch up, which now we've seen over the last 2 games, Kike Hernandez is finally kind of finding himself. So now that when he gets on base, that makes everything even better for the rest of this lineup going forward. So that was very encouraging as far as for Kike. So hopefully we see those trends continue here. As we mentioned, the Red Sox will have their home opener this coming Friday. They have tomorrow off, so that'll be a fun one. I always love the home opener. Always, that's the one time I'm really not, unless it's like something very special, like all the pop and circumstance. I just kind of want to get to the game. I love the game itself. But this is one of the traditions I do love, the home opener, having like all the legends come out and stuff. So there are certain times when I do like the pop and circumstance. There are certain times, but when it's like August and you just want to get that game on, those are the times, unless it's something special. But anyways, I'll be glued to the TV that day. I'll be so pumped for the home opener. I can't wait for that one on Friday. And of course, then we'll finally get into the everyday grind here as we start to get into the regular schedule instead of all these day games, which are killing me because I have to work and it's just sitting there like in between calls and just sitting in between what I do for work and just sitting there like, oh, after I'm done. just trying to keep up on in the background where I hate have I want to just be able to sit down at 7 o'clock at night and be like, all right, game is on, let me watch. But of course, can't always have my way. So yeah, can't wait for them to get back into those 7 o'clock games. And of course, as we mentioned, it is also getting close to draft time as well. So we will take a look here at some of the options for the Patriots over the next couple weeks as we get closer to the draft at the end of this month. So we'll look at some of the Patriots' areas of need. And this week, we're going to look at the wide receiver position, where this is one of the positions that I would love them to take. Now, obviously, I know a lot of people get scared away because of how they've drafted wide receivers over the last, well, hell, you could say the whole dynasty itself. But this is where, and I know people got scared away with the N'Keal Harry pick, but I know this is where people really are really torn on this. In my opinion, if you have a guy that you believe in that is a true number one, that's a game breaker, take him in the first round. And if if his value is so much where you have him graded as a top 10 guy, as a top 15 guy that slipped to you, that's a true playmaker, a true star that you're like, this is a true talent that keeps on slipping for maybe injury concerns like a Jamison Williams or a Mechie later on in the draft, or you name it. You have a guy like that that's injured, but you're like, this guy could be a good one, but he's slipping for some reason. And then you look at that board at 21, or if you maybe trade out into that early second round and you see, I got to take it. But this is where, again, this is one of those areas of need / want for me that I really want them to go after. And people want that instant gratification of, you want somebody to really come in and take over now. But obviously, remember, we're building for the long term here as well. So this is where you get one of those stud young receivers and you're checking off that box, where I don't get, because I've heard people not want to take those wide receivers. Well, I want to take that building block of a defensive lineman, a linebacker, which don't get me wrong, I want that too. But for me, if you have that stud wide receiver, you need that game breaker. You need to find that next Edelman, Gronkowski, Randy Moss, Deion Branch, the one that's going to go in there and make those plays, that's going to break the game open for you. Because you can only for so long can you just be a plodding offense. You have to have the ability to, when it calls for it, have a guy that you can throw a 50, 60, 70-yard bomb to, or throw a screen, or throw a 5 to 8 yard slant, and then he takes it to the house. You have to have those guys that you can rely on, that can do that are just monster playmakers, or that have the ability to make that big play when it counts. And right now, they just, in my opinion, they just don't have that big play guy. And that's where, for offensively and in this draft, if you can get that guy and you can draft him and develop him with Mac Jones, go ahead and take that opportunity. Don't be scared away. Don't be one of these people that doesn't want to take the opportunity because they failed in the past, and because for some reason you don't believe in taking those wide receivers early on. I mean, how many times do we have to see places like Cincinnati take Jamar Chase and draft a guy like T. Higgins in the second or third round, or how often, or see Justin Jefferson go, see Jalen Waddle go in the first round. So those are three, obviously T. Higgins, different story, but those three guys, Waddle, Jefferson, Chase, just to name a few, that went in the first round, those guys are game breakers. Those guys are stud wide receivers. So in that spirit of wanting one of those guys and looking, because obviously we're also looking at needs here, we'll break down at least some of my favorite guys in this draft that I really am interested in, or at least take a look at them and see what the Patriots have or have an opportunity to do here. So my favorite guy in this draft, and then again, everybody's going to have their different rankings, and they're going to rank and going to slot them differently into different places. But for me, that guy, my first guy, my favorite number, in my opinion, the best receiver in this draft is Jamison Williams. Now, of course, he's dealing with a torn ACL, so that's where maybe this works out for the Patriots as far as he slips down the draft board because there are concerns that he might not be ready for until like mid-season, which again, that's where don't be scared of that. You have to remember, this is only Mac Jones' second year. If you can get him a guy like Jamison Williams, who in my opinion is a true number one wide receiver in this draft, go and do it. Go and get it. Because it's not just for this year. This is for 4 or 5 years that you're a minimum. And then if he is as good as I think he's going to be, then you have a guy here that's going to be in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 years. Then I would really love that. So you can't just be short-minded and think, no, don't do it. Not for this year. And Jamison Williams, he's not a overly big guy. His height sits at 6'2". He's 189. So obviously, maybe add a little bit of muscle, maybe get to about 200 pounds. But his biggest asset is his speed. He runs a 4.25 40, which is absolutely blazing fast speed, blazing fast for that 40. So again, and this is a guy where he has that tremendous speed. He might not be the physical guy that maybe that the Patriots have kind of gone after when they tried to draft N'Keal Harry, and now that they traded for Devontae Parker, had a guy like that. But in my opinion, this is where he's not small. He's 6'2". He's a little on the a little on the slender side of being 180. But again, that's something where when you get to the NFL, you can bulk up and add muscle in the area, a little weight in the area you need to. But again, he's fast, but more than just being fast, he's a good route runner. This is a guy that in his last year here with Alabama had 79 receptions, 1,572 yards, and had 15 receiving touchdowns. This was the absolute go-to guy that Bryce Young had in his stable until he tore his ACL. So, and that was in the national championship game. So this is a special guy, very special. This is a guy that, in my opinion, is a game breaker. Like I said, he's going to be able to use that speed, be able to use his route running ability, and obviously he's the classic. Oh, tape. Well, take your top off guy, take the top off the defense guy from the speed standpoint. But again, this is not just a blazing kind of guy that's just like, oh, he runs a 4.25. Oh yeah, he's just a track star. No, this is a guy that's been a very, very productive receiver in college. As far as when he transferred over to Alabama. And I just love the abilities that he has. And he's already got pro coaching down there. He got coached up by Bill O'Brien. And again, so we're looking at a guy that, in my opinion, is the best receiver in this draft, based on that speed and route running ability, and that's where and again, where even that can help you once you get down towards the red zone, where if you have that quick twitch ability that you're gonna like he does, he's gonna be able to use some of those shorter routes and that quick twitch ability to get open in the red zone, kind of a la Edelman a little bit, but obviously in a bigger frame, height wise than Edelman. But again, this is one of those picks where you're talking about getting a number one wide receiver that has the speed and route running ability to absolutely be a nightmare for defenses for years to come. So that's a guy that, if because of the injury, I think there's a realistic possibility that he could be there. Obviously, unless you get a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, who are have the 29th pick, and they're looking to move up, because obviously they traded away Tyreek Hill, and their number one wide receiver is Juju Smith-Schuster right now. So they're one of those teams that could trade up to get a Jameson Williams or one of these top tier wide receivers. So he's one of those guys that you got. That's one of those teams they have to watch out for. Maybe in New Orleans if they want to pair him up with Michael Thomas, or obviously if Michael Thomas is still unhappy with that situation and they maybe trade him away, they might need a number one. And obviously there are other teams out there that have been linked to him. But this is a situation where if he's still sitting there at 21, I am jumping on that phone in as fast as I can get there and calling the league and writing him down on that card and saying Jameson will at number 21, the Patriots select Jameson Williams. If that happens, I will be happy as a pig in shit that day. That he is my number one target for the Patriots overall. And then we move down, we look at some more of these wide receivers. And of course, looking at these top tier ones, of course, he was early on in the process, he was the number one wide receiver, and in a lot of boards now, it's Garrett Wilson that's kind of popped up into the top spot. But for me, the next guy down that maybe could still be there depending on how things shake out, but I still think he might be a top 15 pick, and that would be Drake London, the USC wide receiver. And Drake London is a guy that he has the size and speed ability. Obviously, he's not as fast as Jameson Williams. He runs a 4.5, 4.55. Not your absolute burner, but that's still good NFL speed where you're going to have some breakaways. You might get excuse me. You're going to have enough speed where you're going to be able to break the top off the defense. Now remember, I'm not saying he's Jerry Rice, but remember there have been Hall of Fame, all-time great wide receivers that didn't have that, oh my God, 4.2, 4.25, 4.32 speed, that absolute burner speed, but they had 4.45, 4.45 speed in, like, I believe, if I'm correct, Jerry Rice it was 4.48 or 4.5, like London did. But my point here is that you don't have to be the Flash. You don't have to be Randy Moss in his prime fast. But so 4.5 is for me is fast enough for me to be a really good playmaker. And then of course he's 6'5", 210. He's a complete wide receiver. He's the complete package that you're looking for. Or maybe in a baseball term, he's a 4.52 player. And I think that 0.5 is going to be the speed. I know I just had that whole conversation, but again, that's the one thing where it's not the Randy Moss and it's not the Jameson Williams speed if we're going to use a comp for this year. It's not that fast, but again, it's I mean, you're still getting pretty much 5-tool player at that point, if you want to put it that way. You're getting the complete package pretty much. And this is a guy that had 88 receptions, 1,084 yards, and 7 touchdowns with USC last year. Now, again, remember USC, this isn't the Matt Leinart years, Carson Palmer years out there at USC where they were absolutely flinging it around and were one of the best teams in the country. So obviously he didn't have the greatest quarterback play out in Southern Cal. But again, this is a guy, to me, complete package, has the size, has speed. He's going to be able to he's going to be able to out physical you at the line of scrimmage. He's going to be able to run by a pretty good chunk of corners. And even on some of the more elite corners, he's going to be able to kind of keep up with them. And he's going to be able to, when he's not able to burn past the guy, going to be able to out muscle him. And he's going to, in my opinion, I love watching the tape here on Drake London. I love watching his videos on Drake London. He's, to me, like I said, he has the ability to really not just, And obviously, I know people are like, oh, N'Keal Harry could use his body in college and body him up. But again, this is a guy that does know how to run his routes, does know how to has a little bit of speed, does know how to basically get down the field, and is a guy that, with being 6'5" and having some speed, that is an absolute weapon for you. But again, this is a guy where I think he's going to be off the board by the time the Patriots pick, but he could slip. And if he does, obviously I would take him, because you're talking about a guy that I think there have been comps out there for like a Vincent Jackson, a Mike Evans, a I mean, somebody even went as crazy as Calvin Johnson. That, in my opinion, was a little over the top, a little nuts. But again, you get the drift there. You're talking about it. If he's Mike Evans, I'll take him all day long. Mike Evans has been one of the more unsung star receivers in the league. He's a guy that's had over, I believe it's over 7,000, 8,000 yards receiving already. He has 70, I believe it's somewhere in that 70 to 80 touchdown range. So we're talking about, and we all know what we see in Mike Evans. Mike Evans is a guy that doesn't have absolute burner speed, but he has enough to get down the field. He has the physical ability and the size and in reach to pluck that ball out of the air. And that's what you also see out of Drake London. And then Mike Evans is a solid enough route runner, which again, we see in Drake London. So again, if you can get a guy that's like a Mike Evans in Drake London, go and do it. Go and get him. In my opinion, that's what I really, really would love to see the Patriots go and do. And as far as the first rounders go, this would be my next one, because I know some people will go with the Garrett Wilson one, who's kind of really jumped up here as of late. But my next first round guy that I love is going to be Chris Olave. Chris Olave, to me, he reminds me of Justin Jefferson. He's 6'1", 189. He runs a 4.39 40, so he's fast. But for me, he's one of those guys where you see Justin Jefferson when he gets into the red zone. He knows his spatial awareness. He knows how to get up and get that ball. He's always, when you look down the field, just like when you see Justin Jefferson, he's always probably like 5 yards down past his corner. And even when the corner's right there with him, he has that knack and that ability to out muscle, or at least use his hands and just pry the ball away and make amazing catches. And again, that's what I see with Chris Olave as well, is maybe just a slightly worse version of Justin Jefferson. So if you get a slightly worse version of Justin Jefferson, oh no, I mean, that would be a hell of a first round pick. But yeah, Chris Olave, to me, he really, for me, in this class, to me, is one of the better route runners, and he really combines that speed and route running ability, really combines them well together, and I just love how he does it. So to me, I'm really excited about him. I might even want him over Drake London. I've been back and forth if I want London or Olave, but I've kind of settled in on Drake London being my number 2 because of the size. But for me, Olave, I would be happy with him as well. Again, because if you get even like 75% of what you got out of Justin Jefferson over these last couple of years, you'd have a hell of a first round pick, and you'd have a great wide receiver to build with. So again, to me, it's the speed, the route running ability. He's not overly tall. He's only 6'1", so it's not like he's got a bunch of size. But again, Justin Jefferson isn't this gigantically huge specimen, but he is very athletic, very fast, and able to run great routes, has great hands. So again, that's what I see out of Chris Olave, is being able to use his speed, route running, in his great hands. And it's just amazing. And even in the red zone is going to be a great target when he can use that shiftiness down there as well. So again, this is I would be so pleased if you ended up getting Chris Olave, and just since we already read everybody else's stats, looking at Chris Olave, he has 65 receptions, 936 yards receiving, and 13 receiving touchdowns. So he's a touchdown magnet as well. So this is a guy that has a nose for the end zone, to use that old cliche as well. But honestly, it's true, because this guy is able to, even with not being a Drake London-esque type of 6'5" beefy target in the end zone, he just knows where to pop open and pop free. So again, that would be a great pick here for the Patriots if they were able to get Chris Olave. So those would be my first round picks here that I would love to see. I know some people are looking at Treylon Burks as well, the Arkansas product, who a lot of people have kind of comped him to Deebo Samuel because he's 6'3", 225. He had 1,100 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns, and they go on 66 receptions, and he's kind of moved around and been in that Deebo Samuel role. I mean, I'm just a little. I don't get me wrong. If they draft him, I'm not going to be totally upset. There's just, to me, there's a little bit of fear of that kind of, a little bit of the unknown, because he wasn't especially he to me, he kind of moved around a little too much for my liking. It was kind of, he didn't settle into one spot for me enough, where in that size and strength ability, because he only runs a 4.5. So that's the other thing, is if he's a Swiss Army knife, like Deebo Samuel has got great speed, but if he's going to be a Swiss Army knife and he's only 4.5 on his speed, that's something where maybe let's back off on that. And maybe if you're more of that physicality type of receiver, you're more in that Mike Evans or Mike Williams with the Chargers, I would take that as well. So if that's what you're going to do, but to kind of where they pushed him up and hyped him up to be a Deebo Samuel, where he's a Swiss Army knife, he's got speed, you can send him on jet sweeps, end arounds, put him in the backfield, and then he can have a bunch of receiving yards. I just, let's pump the brakes on that. And of course, with the slower speed and that size, this is the one that kind of reminds me a little bit more of Harry, where this is the one where I'm like, oh, I don't want him to be another N'Keal Harry. So, and again, he didn't go to a strong passing school, even though I know he had 1,100 yards, but again, he had most of those receiving yards down in Arkansas. So there's just a little bit of worry here. But again, if maybe you get him in the second round later on, that's where I would be okay with it. Or maybe if it drops to the third, you're getting a better bargain and you see what you have. That I wouldn't be as upset with. But he's the one that a lot of people have kind of got really been high on. But I'm not. I would rather have a guy like John Mechie or Jahad Dotson over him, maybe even a Sky Moore, maybe. But for me, and we'll just take a couple. I'll look at a couple more here before we go. And the guy that I really want here in this, if so, let's say if Jameson Williams is gone, Drake London is gone, Chris Olave is gone, and even a guy like Garrett Wilson, who I wouldn't mind having either. But if those guys are all off the board, this is where I would maybe tend to just take that linebacker, take the corner if there are one of those still on the board. If maybe Nakobe Dean or Devin Lloyd, or you have one of those corners still out there, take one of those guys, or you take the Jordan kid, the tackle from Georgia, you take him as well. I would be happy if those wide receivers there, take another position that you really need, or the best player on the board at that point, unless it's an offensive lineman, then I would just absolutely hate that night, hate the first round. I would just be so unhappy. But even if you decide to trade out and get more second round picks, this is where the guy that I want in the second round, obviously, unless a guy like Jameson Williams or Olave slip, if one of those first rounders slips, then yes, then John Mechie is the guy that I want next. John Mechie, to me, is one of the best bargains that you're going to have in this draft, because He's also out with a ACL injury. He's probably going to come back sooner than Jameson Williams. And this is a guy that, yes, he's not as fast as Jameson Williams, who ran a 4.25, but John Mechie ran a 4.36 on his 40. And he's 6 foot even, 195 pounds. So he's a little bit, if you kind of put the height of Jameson Williams as 6'2" and he's 198, yes, Williams is a little heavier, but with Mechie being 6 foot 195, he's a little bit more stockier, if you want to put it that way. But he's 6 foot, runs a 4.3. So this is a guy that and this is a guy that has a connection with Mac Jones, because Jameson Williams transferred there to Alabama from Ohio State this year, so he didn't have any contact with Mac Jones. But the good thing here is that John Mechie has a strong rapport already with Mac Jones from his time in Alabama, and even John Mechie came out during the combine and said that he would love to play with Mac Jones, that he would love to do that. And of course, obviously, he's just hoping. But again, this is a guy that in his last year that he was healthy had 96 receptions for 1,142 yards and 8 touchdowns. And that was sharing time with guys like Jalen Waddle, who obviously he did get hurt, I believe only into 4 or 5 games, and sharing time with Waddle and Devontae Smith, who won the Heisman. So, but John Mechie, who after Waddle went down alongside of Devontae Smith, John Mechie had a great campaign as well. So there's great rapport there that John Mechie has with Mac Jones. And then, of course, besides that, John Mechie is just, I think people were kind of putting him in that box earlier that he was more maybe, he's not as explosive. He's more possession. But I mean, a guy with 4.3 speed I wouldn't put him in the possession category. And I think kind of where people got really blown away is that you had Jameson Williams there, who was an absolute beast, an absolute monster. Like I said, the best receiver in this class. But when it comes to John Mechie, this is a guy that he has great speed. This is a guy that is a good route runner. He's going to use that speed and route running ability to get open and use those moves with his feet to break away from those corners. That's how he's going to get away. He's not going to out physical you from that standpoint. Not that he can't, but this is a guy obviously that's going to be, in my opinion, that he would be an absolute steal to get him, because this is a guy that already has that rapport, is a guy that can be with that speed and with his smarts that he has, could be a steal here. This could be that next great receiver that put him in that AJ Brown, that DK Metcalf category, who slid in that second round because of injury concerns for the Patriots. Now one of the other prospects that I do love is going to be Jahan Dotson, who's drawing a lot of comparisons to Tyler Lockett, who he's 5'11", 184. So just like Lockett, he's a little bit on the slender side, but the Penn State product had 91 receptions, 1,182 yards, and 12 touchdowns. And he runs a 4.43 in the 40. So he's a little bit, a little slower than Mechie. But again, this is a guy that he's gonna be probably start off as a special teamer for you, maybe return some punts or return some kicks. But this is a guy that I think can fill that Tyler Lockett role. So that is a comp that I do like watching him. He does remind me of Tyler Lockett. He reminds me of being that guy that gets deep down the field. He's going to be a deep ball, I wouldn't say specialist, because he's a little more than that, but he's going to be that guy that blazes past you, gets open deep down the field. And with Mac Jones can take great advantage of that So this is a guy that, again, maybe just because of the size size, that you're a little weary on that. And again, it's a 4.43, so it's maybe not as fast as what you get in Tyler Lockett, and he's not as polished. But again, this is a guy that I think can fill out that type of role where, again, he's going to get down the field deep. He's going to be a guy that if you put him in this offense, when you have a guy like Devontae Parker now, you have Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers, who are more the possession guys, the physical guys. You have Jaha Dotson, who you're worried about. You're worried about Devontae Parker, and you're worried about Kendrick Bourne. Now, when you have a guy that's streaking down the field, he's going to get open and get you probably like a 50, 60-yard touchdown. And then once you slide coverage over there, then you have Devontae Parker and you have Kendrick Bourne. So again, this is one of those guys that I think could work well. Obviously, I think he's more of a 1B, more into a high tier number 2 receiver in that category. But again, this is a guy that I really do like heading into the draft. And then, of course, the last one that I'm going to touch on here tonight, of course, because I'm not going to go through everybody, but one of the ones that I have been a little intrigued on here is going to be Sky Moore, who is the from Central Michigan, I should say. 95 receptions, 1,292 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Now, again, he plays in the division one double A. Excuse me. Yeah. One double A. So, no. I'm sorry. He does play in 1A college football. He plays in the smaller conference. My apologies. He runs a 4.4, so again, he's kind of still in that category of the Jaha Dotson, the John Mechie, as far as does have pretty good speed. Now, my concern here is he is on the small side. He's 5'10", 195. He's got a little size to him as far as weight wise, but again, he's a little smaller. So this is really kind of a guy that really is banking on that speed and trying to get open from that standpoint. But if as far as that route running ability, when it comes to him, with short, as far as like his intermediate and short routes, he actually has gotten graded pretty high here overall. The hands are pretty good as well. So basically, we're looking at a guy that can be that intermediate to deep threat, is a decent route runner. So again, it's going to be the concern is going to be that size and blocking ability for him when it comes to Sky Moore, as far as he's concerned. So again, this is a guy that he's a little slight. And is he maybe is he going to be in the NFL? Is he going to be a one-trick pony if maybe he's not as good a route runner as maybe some people have graded him out to be? But again, this is a guy that he does kind of pique my interest because, again, he has that speed. He has something the Patriots are missing. So if you can't get one of those top tier guys and you are back in the second round, you already get your linebacker or corner, and maybe you've got some more, or you trade back and got more ammunition. Maybe you go out and get you go and select Sky Moore. If you didn't get, maybe if you didn't get, even if you didn't get maybe a John Mechie or Jaha Dotson out there in the end of the first or second round. So those are my favorites moving forward. So again, I don't know if the Patriots actually are going. I don't have a great feeling that the Patriots are going to take a wide receiver in the first round. If anything, I'm feeling this is one of those prime years that they're going to trade back out, just because of all of the talk that this is a deep year for, again, it's like the third or fourth year in a row that it's a deep year for wide receivers. And then on top of that, it's a pretty decent year for linebackers and corners as well in their positions in need. So of course, everything in their position in need is deep, which it's good, but again, it's probably guarantees that they're probably going to trade out. So I'm going to probably have my hopes up that Jameson Williams, but that they're going to have somebody like a Jameson Williams or a Olave there, and then I'm going to see them trade away, and then the team trades right up and drafts Olave or drafts Jameson Williams. I'm going to be so pissed. I hope I'm wrong about this, but I have a strong feeling that they are going to trade out of the first round. Which, if you get enough second round, if you get a couple extra, if you get maybe another second round pick or 2 second round picks or whatever you can get from maybe one of these really needy teams, maybe I wouldn't be as upset about it. Because then you have enough to kind of go out and fill some of those other needs, maybe, and then you can go get a John Mechie or a Jaha Dotson or Sky Morris, and then I wouldn't be as upset. So again, we'll continue this series. When next week we'll look into the linebacker core, I should say the linebackers that are in this draft, of course, with the Patriots trying to get younger, trying to get faster, trying to get just all around better at that position moving forward here now that they've let a lot of these guys go from that linebacking core. So that will do it here for this episode of New England Sports Weekly. Next week, again, we will, like I mentioned, we'll continue the look into the NFL draft. We will have a few Celtics playoff games to break down. Or no, we'll have one. Well, actually, no, yes, we will have two because, like I said, maybe one, maybe two, depending on when we do the show. So again, it's going to be TBD for the show next week because the Celtics have their Wednesday night playoff game. So of course we're going to want to watch that. So we'll figure out a day and I'll let you know. But again, we'll have a Celtics playoff game or two to talk about next week. We'll have the NFL draft to keep breaking on down until we get close to that to the end of this month. Then we'll actually, and of course, we'll have more Red Sox games to look into. And then the regular season for the NHL is going to be winding down here and getting ready for the postseason. And hopefully we'll have an opponent for the Bruins to look forward to. So until next week, I've been Sean Metcalf. And always remember that if you like the show, to like and subscribe here on YouTube and hit that bell for notifications. And of course, if you can't catch the live stream, always go to Spotify or SoundCloud, and you can follow the show just by searching the name at New England Sports Weekly, and you'll find us there. And of course, you can always tune in a live stream every Wednesday night. Usually, we'll talk about you next week when that's going to be. Let you know, but usually every Wednesday night at 8:00. And of course, if you want to send us any questions in the live stream, it's always open, always welcome to send a question on by. And of course, if you can't stay here or you can't be here for the live stream, you can always hit me up on the show's Twitter account at NE Sports Weekly and give the account a follow. And of course, you can always hit me up on my personal Twitter or Instagram account. It's the same handle at Sean_Met28. But of course, we always love any of your feedback. So we hope to see you next week. And until then, I'm Sean Metcalf, and you have a good week.